Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Kylan Wheeler's senior thesis defense. He wrote on two works, The Crucible by Arthur Miller and Gunnar's Daughter. His thesis entitled Rage and Reconciliation, Forgiveness and Vengeance, on Arthur Miller's Crucible, and Sigrid Undsen's Gunnar's Daughter. Please welcome Kylan Wheeler to the podium.
First off, I just wanted to say thank you for sticking around this long. I know it's been a long night so far, but last one. Okay. Today, using Arthur Miller's The Crucible, Sigrid Undsen's Gunnar's Daughter, I will discuss the characters' struggles with forgiveness and vengeance and how they reveal the complexities of forgiveness. I will also discuss how choosing to forgive is ultimately better not only for the healing of the individual, but for society as a whole. Today, I have three major points. The first is that forgiveness is a decision, and it is never impossible. The second is why vengeance is destructive and selfish and is never beneficial to anyone. And the third is what makes up a true forgiveness. The main action of Gunnar's Daughter takes place after Vigdis is raped by her lover Jot. She then gives birth to a son she named Olvar and initially tries to kill for being a reminder of her shame. However, she eventually comes to forgive him. She then spends the rest of her life focusing on getting her revenge on her lover and attacker. Because of her actions, she is left with nothing, as Jot commits suicide and her son leaves her, never to return. At one point in the story, Vigdis' hate for Jot and her son Olvar are both identical, even to the point of trying to kill them both. Later on in the story, however, she is willing to carry her son through a blizzard as her home burns to the ground. She later tells him, referring to that same night, quote, "I too learned that one night I too would go to the world's end to save you when you really needed your mother." End quote. Vigdis completely shifts how she views her relationship with her son, but she never does this with Jot. The same hate that she harbors against Jot and claims is impossible to overcome is the same hate that she once held for her son. Even when a potential suitor offers her a brand new life, she only agrees if he goes and kills Jot to avenge her, which results in the suitor's death. Vigdis ultimately made a choice. She made a choice to forgive her son, but she also made a choice to fuel her anger for Jot, even at the expense of other people. And as a result of that, everyone suffered, including Vigdis. The Crucible takes place during the Salem witch trials. The main protagonist, John Proctor, cheats on his wife Elizabeth with her servant named Abigail. Abigail is then caught engaging in witchcraft to kill the Proctors. To protect herself, she claims that she saw other people with the devil, which spirals into a crazy revenge plot on the whole town, including the Proctors. Abigail was kicked out of the Proctor's house and was not completely at fault for what John decided to do. So it is understandable that she would be frustrated with her situation. Jot assaulting Vigdis was horrible, and it is disgusting, and it is completely logical that Vigdis would hold resentment towards him for it. Obviously, these are two very different situations, but both of them made the same mistake of choosing to harbor their hatred, hurting other people outside of themselves and the ones that they originally hated. Abigail uses her pain and her bad decisions as a reason to hurt others instead of understanding her wrong decisions. Vigdis not only holds on to her hatred, but tries to get her son to be driven by that same hatred that she has. Both of these are completely lose-lose situations, and there's no benefit to anyone because of them. Vengeance only seems like a good option because it comes from a selfish desire to make yourself feel better after being hurt. Vigdis' son, Olvar, and John Proctor's wife, Elizabeth, are the characters that most embody what actual forgiveness is. Vigdis tells her son his entire life just how evil his father was, and tries to raise him to hate him also. But despite this discouragement, Olvar decides to go out himself and forgive Jot for what he has done. Once Jot returns to ask for Vigdis' forgiveness once again, her son, Olvar, forgives him once again, but Vigdis refrains. Obar then chases after his mother in desperation to get her to forgive him and end the suffering, but she still refuses. Obar actively searches out for his father in order to forgive him, and even once he has achieved that goal, he still strives to get Vigdis's forgiveness. In the Crucible, John cheats on his wife, and despite this, she does not leave him. However, she does treat him coldly throughout a decent amount of the play, as one would expect. And as the conflict intensifies, John sacrifices his own standing in the town by admitting that he cheated with Abigail in order to denounce her crazed accusations. Elizabeth, without knowing what has occurred, lies about John's actions to save him, showing that she still does truly love him and desires to forgive him, but can't bring herself to do it. Later on, when John is about to be executed, Elizabeth decides to fully forgive him and even takes part of the blame herself. This final act of forgiveness allows John to go to the gallows at peace, knowing that he is dying for the truth and has his wife's forgiveness. Both of these characters have two major things in common when forgiving others. They have an internal desire to resolve pain and help others and better their situation, and an external gesture of forgiveness and grace towards the person who they originally despised. While there are other smaller factors, without these two, true forgiveness that heals everyone involved is impossible and cannot be achieved. The reason why these scenes of forgiveness are so moving in these texts is because we see the characters fight against their desire to hold on to this hatred. And despite all their struggles and reasons not to forgive, they still push through that hardship. When people choose to hold on to their resentment instead of letting go, they directly affect everyone around them. Forgiving ultimately comes down to a choice. Letting go of past sorrow and allowing everyone to heal from the pain that has been caused. Or allowing the anger and selfishness to guide their actions. And while it can be difficult to forgive, especially for terrible acts of violence such as Vigdis, forgiveness ultimately betters not only the self, but also society. Forgiveness allows all people to benefit from their failures and learn to better themselves. And the result of this is a more honorable, more respectable, and more moral society. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. That was great. To give us some context for your studies, could you tell us what brought you to this topic?
Well, originally, I picked out the Crucible as my main text, and what inspired me to do that was a quote that I heard from a church summer camp. The quote was, "Truth without grace is mean, and grace without truth is meaningless." And this quote fit really well with the Crucible because it is set in this Christian world, but there are lots of examples of people abusing that religion in order to enact whatever selfish desires they had, such as Abigail. And looking at that text, it was not long enough to fully expound on that. And Mr. Misko actually recommended me to read Gunner's Daughter. And after reading those texts, I saw another common theme of this forgiveness and vengeance, and how it doesn't just lift up the people that hold vengeance and enact it out on others, and actually promotes that forgiveness while still showing just how bad those actions were. And I thought that would be a much more fulfilling and interesting topic. Even though I still like the other one, and that quote is still great, I thought this would be a more fulfilling thesis.
Connected to that quote, I'd like to hear more about the role of grace in these works. Where does grace come in relation to the choice you describe for the characters who forgive those who've committed a great injustice against them?
Well, the best form of grace that I can use to compare to that is the grace of God. God is great, and he is just and graceful and merciful both at the same time. And grace comes out of this position of still holding that justice, but allowing mercy to shine through that, and allowing others to not be forced to reside in their mistakes. So it is similar to forgiveness, but it is also coming out of this idea of holding on to justice and mercy.
Following up on grace understood as God's sort of direct help. In these texts, is let's just take Gunner's daughter. Are pagans capable of forgiveness? Or is it only sort of with conversion that we see forgiveness? Like what?
Well, I think certainly in a more Christian society, it can be easier to do that. And there are lots of examples in pagan societies how vengeance or avenging is risen up and promoted. So I would say that it is definitely harder and less likely that that'd be the case, but it is still definitely possible. And we see in Gunner's daughter, at the beginning, they are pagan, and there is this conversion throughout the middle of it into Christianity. And just because they have shifted to Christianity does not mean that everybody is forgiving each other. Vigdis shifts to converts to Christianity, and she still runs away from doing that final act of forgiving Yat. But we see characters who aren't put in that situation as much. Yat still converts to Christianity, but it is not emphasized as much in his area because he is constantly moving around trying to figure out how to resolve the suffering. And he is still works on trying to forgive himself, but can't quite get there just because of the struggles he faced. But I think it is definitely possible that that could have happened.
Thank you.
Wonderful job, Kylan. Thank you so much. One thing I wanted to bring up, and I was relates to the later part when you were talking about the benefits that come from forgiveness and what it brings for the characters and those around them. And I was wondering whether the role of utility, right? Like it's going to bring me something good or bring someone else something good, whether that diminishes grace or that provides, or whether it does not, right? Is that a bad thing if someone does it for a selfish reason, that it's like there's something I gained from this? Does that have any effect on the grace itself, or might it have an impact on specific characters in a way that made it more appealing or interesting, push them towards that?
That's a good question. I think, based on what I've seen, is that it is not to the effect the same level or same, I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but the same ideal form of forgiveness. It is not as close to that. If someone did something that hurt me, I could forgive them to relieve them of that thing and not truly forgive them. So in that sense, it is not that same, it's not true grace, because you are not truly letting go of that. And even though it could still benefit that other person and give them the illusion that they are forgiven, that is still a subsidiary of what that actual true and full grace is. And that goes the other way too. If you forgive someone internally, just for yourself, I have forgiven them, I no longer resent them for what they have done, but you still don't outwardly express that in that external gesture of love and grace, that is still lesser because you're using that purely for yourself. So thinking either scenario, or if you're doing it, even if you do both things, but you're doing it out of a place of self-interest, that is still tainted by that.
Thank you, yeah. That's a good way of answering that.
It seems like it's paradoxically connected sort of to love then. You can't love another person so that you will win in the end. It sort of defeats its own end. I'm wondering about a parallel between some characters. So we see a number of characters who are motivated in one way or another by shame. So Reverend Paris at the outset of the Crucible is concerned with his image before the congregation. That's his initial concern. He's even seems a little bit less concerned, about the health of his daughter and niece. To what degree do these books reveal any connection between shame and vengeance?
So there is in both these texts a lot of examples of that, with Yacht asks for forgiveness multiple times from Vigdis and denies him every single time. And he is put into this position of immense shame by this, even directly afterward. And because of that, his life is affected throughout the entire book. We see him lose his children, his wife, and everything that he held dear after what he had done because of what he had done to Vigdis. He kept it a secret from his wife, and that affected their relationship. And he's just forever hurt by this and can't find it to forgive himself and can't seek that forgiveness. And in the Crucible, we even see shame that Reverend Paris has. He is, at the beginning, so focused on building up his reputation, even if that means other people that could be innocent might die, that just overtakes him. But at the end, when we see him begging Proctor to admit that he committed witchcraft so that way he wouldn't have to be hung, and he is begging him on his knees because he cannot admit himself that he has done something wrong, and he's trying to find the easiest way out of that. And his niece stole all of his money and left him, and he is in this position of no power, which he once held so high. So that shame comes from a lack of grace, or at least a lack of grace that is given to them. Reverend Paris is pretty much left just completely destroyed by what he has done, and he just can't even come to fully grasp it himself. So I think that connection with grace and suffering are both tied very closely together, and that also helps emphasize why that forgiveness is also very important in that situation. Just allowing that to be moved on from, healed from.
The parallel is interesting because with Yacht. So Yacht, we'll take an example. So at the beginning of the novel, Yacht feels shame when his horse loses in the horse fight. So remember, he buys that horse, he engages in this Norwegian practice, which I guess they took pretty seriously. And he's so enraged that his horse loses, he even though it's a very expensive animal, he runs up to it and tries to dispatch it with his sword, ends up getting hurt himself and killing the other guy's horse. So that seems motivated by just this intense shame. He can't believe his horse lost in front of all these people. Does he? You seem to mention that he loses that shame at some point. Is he still ashamed at the end? When he agrees to the sort of duel that Victus wants?
Well, in that final fight, or duel, there is this very moving scene where he is wounded by Ovar, and then to protect him takes his own life. And I believe his last words were something along the lines of just wanting to let his head lay in Victus's lap once more, even if that means it is his severed head, which ends up happening. And there is this sense of relief from him as he no longer has to experience this shame that he desires, but I don't think that he is fully released from that. This is just a last action to do whatever he has to do in order to resolve that suffering. And in a way, it does. Vigdis can't hold that against him any longer because she has finally achieved what she has been hoping for her entire life. But she realizes that it was empty, and she is left with nothing her son leaves her, and she is left in this giant palace all alone with no one to be with her.
We are out of time. Thank you.
Do it again.